The American West stirs up grand images from movies, daring escapades, shootouts at high noon, tough sheriffs and marshals keeping the peace, and the cavalry riding in to save the day. The history of the Wild West is full of myths and stereotypes, but the truth about justice in the West is often more complicated and more unsettling. Violence plagued the American West. Settlers faced rising numbers of illegal acts as people poured into the frontier, searching for new lives, and communities had to handle justice on their own. Because of the limited resources and extreme isolation of the West, justice usually required creative and unconventional tactics, far from the noble law and order portrayed in Western movies. The accused often faced justice that was harsh, biased, unsanctioned, and corrupt. 1. Homicide rates in the West were extremely high. Homicide rates in the West were high, rivaled only by the violence of the American South during the Civil War and Reconstruction. An adult living in Dodge City, Kansas, from 1876 to 1885, stood a 1 in 61 chance of not surviving. A resident of San Francisco, California, from 1850 to 1865, had a 1 in 203 chance of a similarly rough end, while residents of some other counties in California had a 1 in 72 chance. Oregon, from 1850 to 1865, had the lowest homicide rate in the West, 1 in 208. 2. Vigilantes took justice into their own hands. When a story attracted public anger, some settlers in the West were quick to take the law into their own hands. These vigilantes were idealized in popular contemporary accounts, but the justice they exacted was often brutal. Not content with apprehension and execution, some vigilantes physically abused the accused. Some even took trophies. In 1891, the skin of a hanged bandit was tanned and made into souvenirs. Vigilantes justified their acts by pointing to the terrible acts the accused had allegedly committed. 3. Most convictions ended in swift executions. The life expectancy of someone who broke the law in the Wild West often decreased dramatically after conviction, especially for those accused of taking another person's life. Whether offenders received an official trial or one carried out by unsanctioned vigilantes, Western justice demanded blood. In California, offenders were convicted in quick trials and hanged at the county courthouse. Execution usually came shortly after the conviction, as appeals and stays of execution were uncommon. If an expected execution did not happen or did not occur quickly enough for the crowd, vigilantes might take matters into their own hands. In one 1851 case, vigilantes convicted a man of stealing gold dust and gave him a mere 3 hours to get his affairs in order before his hanging. 4. Private detectives brought in ne'er-do-wells by any means necessary. The Wild West saw the rise of the Pinkerton detectives, a private agency commonly hired as bounty hunters for the most troublesome offenders. The Pinkertons infiltrated the Reno crew after their infamous train heist and worked to bring down Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch. Despite the detectives' reputation, the outlaw Jesse James continued to elude them. In their pursuit of James, the Pinkertons lost the goodwill of the public when it became clear they would use whatever means necessary to get their man. During a raid on James's mother's house in 1875, one of the Pinkertons threw an explosive through the window. It proved fatal to James's 8-year-old half-brother and caused his mother to lose part of her arm. James wasn't at the house, as he had already fled after being tipped off. With public opinion against them, the Pinkertons were forced to call off their pursuit. 5. Vigilantes sometimes took accused offenders from their jail cells. Even when the accused were caught and awaited trial, vigilante squads did not always have the patience to wait for a legal sentence or risk an acquittal. Instead, they showed up at the jail and demanded to deal with the offenders themselves. In one 1878 incident, an accused killer was caught and taken to jail, with a trial scheduled for the next day. But during the night, 20 or 30 masked men arrived at the jail with guns in hand. The vigilantes took the man and hanged him immediately. 6. Death in the line of duty was common for lawmen. The West had a variety of legitimate lawmen, ranging from town sheriffs and marshals to the United States Marshals, appointed by the Attorney General. United States Marshals were charged with maintaining federal law, and they could deputize local men to form a posse when greater numbers were necessary. During this period, deaths in the line of duty were common. The United States Marshals alone had several deadly incidents. In 1872, a marshal and 7 members of his posse were fatally shot when they tried to take a prisoner from the custody of a Cherokee court. In 1885, a deputy marshal and 3 members of his posse engaged in a deadly shootout. A prisoner escape claimed the lives of a deputy marshal and 2 posse members in 1887. Another did the same to 2 deputy marshals and 1 posse member in a 1893 shootout. The Old West still holds records for the deadliest incidents involving multiple law enforcement causalities. 7. Many towns tried to enforce strict gun control. The Old West had no shortage of guns, creating a worrying situation for lawmen trying to prevent violent offenses. Most cities in the West had a simple solution: gun control. Towns like Tombstone, Arizona, and Dodge City, Kansas, required visitors to surrender their guns when they entered the town. In fact, the 1881 shootout at the OK Corral started as a conflict over Billy Clanton and the McClory brothers refusing to give up their guns when they entered Tombstone. Anyone defying a Western town's gun control laws was likely to meet a violent end. Author and cowboy Andy Adams described the gun laws of Dodge City in his account published in 1903. The buffalo hunters and rangemen have protested against the iron rule of Dodge's peace officers, and nearly every protest has cost human life. Don't ever get the impression that you can ride your horses into a saloon or shoot out the lights in Dodge. It may go somewhere else, but it don't go there. Most cowboys think it's an infringement on their rights to give up shooting in town, and if it is, it stands, for your 6 shooters are no match for Winchesters and buckshot. And Dodge's officers are as game a set of men as ever faced a danger. 8. Vigilante justice was often racially motivated. Vigilante justice is inherently subject to the biases of the public, which often leads to the racially motivated selection of targets. The West was no exception, with plenty of ethnic minorities considered the other and regarded as a threat by white settlers. Hispanic, Native American, and Chinese people were frequent targets of vigilante acts in California. In 1878, Native American Juan La Cruz was accused of attacking a woman and child while drunk. The woman and child were unharmed in the incident, but public anger turned against La Cruz. A mob seized the accused attacker from jail, and La Cruz was later found hanging in the woods. When the body was found, one witness reportedly said, "You've done a good job, you reformers. Now why don't you hang the man who sold the whiskey to the Indian?" 9. Many offenses went unpunished. Working with weak political organization and limited resources, many Western cities were unprepared to handle high crime rates. The justice system's lack of ability to punish offenders in many cases prompted the rise of unsanctioned vigilante justice. As hopeful settlers struck out for California during the gold rush, Los Angeles, California, became a hotbed of less than honorable actions. Los Angeles County, with a population of approximately 6,000, had a higher homicide rate than New York City. The county also had a high incidence rate of assault and other violent offenses. In the face of the sheer number of offenses, the legal system had difficulty keeping up, and many went unpunished. One potential settler said, "This place will not do for me. There is no security here. I dare not venture out after the dark of night has set in." 10. San Francisco residents formed a vigilante committee. San Francisco, California, was a gold rush boomtown with a rapidly increasing population, and that boom brought a sharp uptick in violent offenses. Tired of the ineffectual justice system, San Franciscans formed a vigilance committee in 1851 with around 200 members. During their time in action, they hanged many offenders and deported others. As conditions improved, the committee disbanded. But in 1856, Irish Catholic politician James Casey fatally shot a newspaper editor who had accused him of involvement in illegal activity. Outraged San Franciscans formed a second vigilance committee. Casey had already been arrested by law enforcement, but 500 men from the committee surrounded the jail and demanded Casey. The vigilantes put Casey through a short trial and hanged him. As with much vigilante justice, this incident showed bias. The vigilantes were mostly native-born American Protestants who had lost political power to recently immigrated Irish Catholics such as Casey. 11. Some lawmen also turned to illegal activity. The West had many problems with vigilante justice, but the legitimate lawmen were sometimes not much better. Many law enforcement officers were not consistently paid, earning money only through taking a percentage of fines or collecting bounties on wanted men. In desperate times, some lawmen turned to crime themselves. Corruption was a common problem among lawmen. Sheriff Dave Allison was accused several times of misappropriation of money. Henry Newton Brown was a deputy sheriff tasked with tracking people for bounty. But on his bounty hunt, Brown robbed a bank with 3 accomplices. A vigilante mob took matters into their own hands, enacting fatal punishment. Timothy Long-Haired Jim Courtright used his position in law enforcement to run a protection racket that extorted profits from gambling dens and saloons. Courtright died in a duel with Luke Short, a former friend and saloon owner who refused Courtright's protection.